Welcome back, friends. Spring is on the way, and today I'm taking you to one of my favourite parts of the entire country, the deepest Cotswolds. This is also quite a revolutionary video for me because it's the first time in years that I've played to a live audience. Enjoy. Walking, one of the simplest and most enjoyable pleasures of life. Take any footpath and you can almost guarantee it will have been carved out centuries ago. If the footpath links two villages mentioned in the Doomsday Book, then it might be over 1,000 years old. Footpaths are public rights of way for pedestrians, not for cars, bicycles, or even horses. Back when walking was the main mode of transport, footpaths led people to the market, or to work, or to church. That's where the footpath is leading me today. Welcome to Marston Maisie, the most northerly village in Wiltshire. 1,000 years ago, residents here had to walk 2 miles cross-country to worship at their nearest church in Maisie Hampton. But that came to an end with the Normans, who built a chapel here, in the centre of the village. It was a practical solution, hence the term Chapel of Ease. However, there was a serious problem. As well as paying to maintain its own chapel, the villagers here had to pay costs to the other church in Maisie Hampton. 2 buildings proved one too many, and this one began to fall down. It was rebuilt, but a cycle of ruin continued for centuries, as subsequent buildings were constructed here, abandoned, and rebuilt again. A curious tale, but one with a happy ending. Or so it seems. Once inside, St. James's turbulent past melts away. This latest incarnation rose up in the 1870s, when the village was finally let off its obligations to Maisie Hampton. The vicar, Reverend William Rankin, raised enough public money to have this chapel built, using materials from the older ones. It stands as a parochial triumph, but I'm afraid we're not out of the woods just yet. Today's adventure was actually based on some quite sad circumstances. When I first visited St. James's Chapel a few weeks ago just to have a look around, I noticed a letter just inside the door written by the current curate who's taking the services there, and she's called Katie. And it said this: "Dear friends and villagers of Marston Maisie, as many of you will know, the number of people attending our regular Sunday services has steadily declined. And over recent months we've been reflecting on the pattern of services at St. James's. Despite our best efforts to introduce different services, there's been little support. So, after careful consideration, it's been decided that St James will become a festival church, which means that our regular monthly services will come to an end from January 2026. The church will continue to be open daily for private prayer and will always be available for major life events like baptisms, weddings and funerals. Personally, I love being able to visit churches like that one and to play the organ on my own and enjoy the architecture of the building. But of course, it's quite a sad part of this church's story. So I had no doubt that I would contact the church and ask if I could make a film about this particular building, and they agreed. But they also said, would I mind if some of the congregation, some of the villagers came in and just sat down and listened to my playing? And of course I was quite happy to oblige. And here's our first visitor. This chap tells me that he's been living in the village for 70 years, during which time he's seen 8 different vicars. He says the church is still used for funerals and the occasional wedding, and it's always packed for both. The organ here is an adapted chamber organ. It came from a country house nearby where it was much smaller and less powerful. But sometime in the early 1900s it was brought here and totally transformed. More stops, more components and more pipes were added, squeezed into this already tight casework. We don't know exactly who did the work, but it's good quality, and there's some packing paper on one of the bass pipes from a newspaper dated January the 27th, 1900. The family who gave it to the church played it for services, but they left in 1921. After that, it was played by the vicar's wife, Mrs. Walker, and eventually by Miss Kitty Young. Kitty died 30 years ago, but since then, nobody from the parish has taken her place. Come Down, O Love Divine, one of my favourite tunes by the composer Ralph Vaughan Williams. The tune is called Down Ampney, or as he pronounced it, Down Amney, without the P sound. And Down Amney is barely 5 minutes away from Marston Maisie. It's just around the corner, and it's the village where Vaughan Williams was born. I do wonder what my few guests were thinking as they were sat listening to the organ music. I wonder whether it was an emotional occasion, or perhaps they were just pleased to sit and listen to some organ music being played as they gazed onwards towards the chancel window. That window itself is quite interesting. If you look at the depiction of Christ in the stained glass, there's a replacement piece of glass underneath his chin. One of the villagers told me that in 1940, a stray German bomb nearly hit this church. Some shrapnel flew over to the east end and smashed a shard of glass, but also made a graze on the east wall. Quite an interesting tale and part of this church's history. Anyway, I'd like to play you another hymn now. This one is called Jesu, Lover of My Soul. It's one of my minor key favourites. Jesu, lover of my soul, on the organ at St James's Chapel in Marston, Maisie. I think it's time for me to evaluate this musical instrument. What did we think of the sound and what was it like to play? I can tell you for a fact, it's a fantastic organ. Seems to be in very good condition, and that's probably because when it was adapted to make a church organ rather than a home organ, the firm who did the work was a very experienced firm. They weren't cowboy organ builders, as you see in many other churches. It was probably a firm called Martin and Coat, who were based in Oxford, although we don't know. It's just that the pipe work seems to be consistent with their work. But yes, it is a great organ. It seemed to be in tune, easy to play. It did have a pedal board down below. And I suppose for me, what's best about it is that when you change the stops, you get a series of different sounds which you can use. On many organs I've played, it's much more restricted. You can really only use, say, the open diapason sound, maybe a flute, maybe a principal, which is a brighter sound, but it starts to sound a bit wobbly. And if it's going out of tune, things start to sound a bit shrill. However, this organ had none of those problems. It seems to have endured its lifetime of well over 125 years quite well. I'd like to play you one more hymn to finish, but before I do, please do remember to click the subscribe button if you haven't done already. I will not always be able to put these videos out on a Sunday. Sometimes it may be a different day, and the only way you'll know is if you subscribe. It doesn't cost a penny. Just look underneath the video and click the subscribe button there. If you do enjoy my adventures, you can also support me financially if you like to. If you look underneath the video, there's a link, and that takes you to my PayPal donations page. From there you can leave a small contribution if you'd like to. I do really appreciate that because I cover lots and lots of miles making these videos. Thank you. For now, I'd like to end with a hymn for the season of Lent, which has just begun. It probably comes from the Old English meaning spring, but it's the season containing 40 days before Easter. It's quite subdued for musicians and of course for congregations alike, but I'd like to play you one of my favourite Lenten hymns, which is called 40 Days and 40 Nights. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Cheerio.